The soft rays of the autumn sun bathed the sleeping maiden in a heavenly glow, catching spectacularly in her flowing scarlet hair. Drusilla's peaceful visage was so enwrapped in slumber that her handmaiden could not find the heart to rouse her. Instead, the dutiful noble chose to open the silk curtains and patiently await her mistress. It had been a long road from Hydria to the princess's ancestral home on the far eastern side of Languet. Not only had the highways been troubled, but their time in Arden had been more than uneventful. A faint rap on the door snapped the handmaid from her reflection, and before she could react, the door swung open, revealing the matronly figure of Her Majesty, the Lady of the East Moorlands, Queen Gabre of Ainsworth. After casting her eyes to her sleeping daughter, she turned her rueful gaze toward Drusilla, before going to Drusilla's bedside. Sitting lightly on the maiden's soft bed, the queen stroked her daughter's freckled cheek, cooing, "Wake up, you sleepy girl, wake up. Your father waits for you." Upon hearing her mother's voice, the princess shook herself from slumber. Smiling warmly, she sat upright, before throwing her arms around her mother's neck, drawing the regal queen's commanding figure into a tight embrace. Caught off guard by her daughter's zealous fervor, a small ladylike gasp escaped Gabre's lips, before she too accepted the uncouth affection her eldest daughter so gleefully bestowed. "Have you been well, mother?" the young lady inquired. "Your correspondence told of the ferocity the war brought to Traford, but your messages are so often plagued with vague allusions to events, and rarely contain a forthright account." Tapping softly on her daughter's arm, Queen Gabre petitioned for her release. Reluctantly, Drusilla loosed her mother from her stifling embrace, and was rewarded with a kiss on the forehead. Awkwardly, Queen Gabre resituated herself, smoothing the crinkles Drusilla left on the queen's opulent dress before retorting. The campaigns ran afoul of many storms, but our soldiers fought bravely, and what was lost was reclaimed. Running her fingers through her child's bedhead, she added, "I would not mention the campaigns to your father. He is weary of battle, and wishes very much to see you." Rising to her feet, Gabre beckoned for Drusilla to make ready. Composing herself, Drusilla rose with her mother, curtsying before cooing, "So you have spoken, so it is done." Satisfied, Gabre turned to exit her daughter's room, but not before shooting another cold glance at Drusilla. Drusilla's warm welcome had not distracted Gabre from the maid's tardiness. The queen's ire was slow to cool, and Drusilla was certain she could expect a more thorough reprimand soon. With the door shut once more, the princess's stiff posture relaxed. Turning to her handmaid, she beamed her infectious grin toward her friend. "It's good to be home," Drusilla glowed. Drusilla smiled, but her eyes betrayed her trepidation, though this and most other subtleties were lost on the princess. She had her father's bearing, and was less than adept in social graces. The princess had much to learn from her mother. Drusilla's mind was altogether consumed by the prospect of being home after a summer in exile. Her thoughts wandered to the recesses of her childhood memories, though these thoughts were soon replaced by the agenda she had planned. Autumn was long in the tooth, and soon winter would usher in the festive season, when she and her family would once more be flung to the furthest reaches of Languet to celebrate those whose victories had brought honor to her family and nation. While spending more time away from her kith and kin was not something she relished, the princess was eager to lend aid to her people in whatever way she could. Though she would arrive back in court long before the time appointed for her return to Arden, it would be some time until Drusilla would see her parents. They would busy themselves lobbying for pledges from lords great and humble until winter drove them to their citadel. Then she and her family would be whole, able to delight in their reunion, sheltered from the war and the nobles' queries by winter's wrath. A season she looked forward to, brought to an all too swift end by spring's thaw, when her father would rally his forces against the invaders, and she would be prepared for her annual pilgrimage to Arden. Dutifully, the chambermaid prepared her lady's attire as Drusilla absent-mindedly went through the motions of her daily preparations. With deft hands guided by years of repetition, the maid and Drusilla worked seamlessly as she readied herself to meet her family. As she slipped from gown to dress, Drusilla worked to tame the princess's mane of wild scarlet. Neither spoke a word, but both found themselves reflecting on what awaited them, eager and dreading to hear how the fortunes of war had played out this year. For all of her jubilance, when the princess at last supped with her family, the tone was somber. Drusilla had tried to speak with her brothers, but Keaton had only feigned pleasantries before returning to examining his plate of rapidly cooling victuals, and Faulkner only stared at her with his peculiar, vacuous gaze, saying little when prodded. Elena, who was seated next to Mother, was far too meek to break the stillness that had beset the family. Drusilla, crestfallen, cast a longing gaze at the 2 chairs left vacant by her father and eldest brother. Her eyes settled on Marlin's seat. No one was in any mood for the joyous reunion Drusilla had envisioned when, finally, Uther's hulking frame burst through the dining room door, breaking the uneasy silence. Her father was hardly ever jovial, but his mood was foul enough to have fear prickling up her spine. Gabriel had warned Drusilla not to speak of the war, but Uther's temper spoke of something graver still than the fatigue of ill-fated battles. His attire was odd as it appeared he was prepared for travel. However, the severe scowl he bore ensured the burdensome silence that had befallen the dining hall would not be lifted, and so none commented on his attire. Little was said over breakfast, save for Gabriel's reprimands of Faulkner's dining etiquette. Uther wolfed down his meal in total silence, and Keaton forced a smile as he repeated his greetings to the family in hopes of drawing Uther from his sullen state, though the looming shadow over the High King lingered. Drusilla found herself unable to touch her meal as the heaviness in the pit of her stomach stifled her appetite. Looking up from her plate, the princess cast careful glances at each of her family members. In that moment, she would have given anything for Marlin to take his seat at her father's right hand once more, and the taunting knowledge that she would never share the room with his smile added anger to her despair. Her mother's placid face was a carefully crafted mask that Drusilla often failed to read properly, but even Gabriel was noticeably frazzled. Keaton's dour countenance reflected that of their father's, despite the prince's best effort. Like her, he tried in vain to spark some sort of conversation, but the gulf created by Marlin's seat proved too great a divide between he and his father. Neither Faulkner nor Elena were inclined to carry a conversation, and so they continued to eat in silence till the meal was concluded. Uther unleashed a loud belch as he placed his goblet upside down on his plate, signaling to the scullery maid that he was finished with his meal. With a loud thud, he slapped the sides of his stomach and wiped his greasy hands on his doublet before scanning the dismal occupants at his table, his eyes eventually resting on Drusilla. The handmaid reported that you had an eventful holiday in Arden. Something about an intrusion into your room? Uther's gravelly voice echoed amidst the silence of the dining hall. Why was this in none of your letters? Drusilla's heart sank, but she refused to allow her face to betray her. She knew there was no point in attempting to salvage her reunion at this point, so she cleared her throat and coolly replied, "It was of such scarce note that I felt it did not merit comment." That's not how the girl's report read, Uther snorted, his stern gaze piercing Drusilla's core. It's not like Drusilla to exaggerate, and your host certainly didn't take the matter lightly either. I have received no less than half a dozen formal apologies from the Chief Inquisitor of Hydria to the Consul Regius himself. Drusilla struggled to maintain her posture as she felt her fervor waver under her father's steel-gray eyes. It was nothing. A mere child. I suspect he was a would-be rogue pilfering my belongings. I told... What did he look like? Uther interjected in his low, unwavering voice, his eyes coming to bear on his eldest daughter as he brushed aside his long, dark, red hair. Was he scrawny, pale, with a long, shaggy black mane? Drusilla, for the first time, allowed shock to lower her defenses, nodding a slow affirmative, but Uther did not need to wait for her response. He spat out a gravelly curse in his native tongue before rising to his feet and marching from the dining hall. Keaton mirrored his father, concern etched in his face as he followed silently after his sire. Drusilla turned to her mother, her unspoken question written plainly on the princess's anxious face. However, Gabriel remained silent beside Elena. From outside of the dining hall, Drusilla could hear some murmuring between Keaton and Uther before the pair walked down the corridor, leaving the remaining four in a tense silence. After a pregnant pause, Gabriel shattered the stillness. "Drusilla, take the children to the garden. I wish for them to see what I've done with it since last they were here." The handmaid bowed gently, wishing to restrain her eagerness to leave the ominous hall, and beckoned for the children to follow her. After a brief protest from Faulkner, Drusilla's two younger siblings shuffled off to the garden, leaving Drusilla and her mother alone. Gabriel's mouth twisted, subconsciously searching for the best avenue to approach her daughter. She started softly. "I know how you must be feeling, but this situation is far more grave than you could possibly realize." She paused for a moment before continuing. "Tell me everything that happened that night. It is vital that you share every detail." Drusilla could scarcely meet her mother's unwavering gaze, but she matched Gabriel's even tone. "Mother, had I believed there was anything of note, I promise you, I would have included the event in my letters. There is scarce to tell. I went to my chambers alone. I heard a noise coming from my wardrobe. I investigated it, and found a smelly little cretin concealed within. I screamed, and the urchin panicked and scrambled out my window before I had a chance to think. I distinctly remember the little wretch. He looked more frightened than I. And Mother, Drusilla did as I ordered. Please, do not remove her. She is one of the few competent servants in our service." "I am well aware," Queen Gabrielle retorted dryly, gesturing for the princess to continue. Drusilla released a breath that she had been holding subconsciously, before a thought dawned on her. "How did you know what the intruder looked like? I never described him to Drusilla. There was little to tell. The wretch bolted as soon as I screamed, and his features were so obscured by the shadow of night that I only caught a glimpse of his matted black hair." Her mother replied coldly, "Do you remember last winter? The ruin of House Margrave?" Drusilla's heart sank at the memory of when the news had reached her, proclaiming the untimely end of the Lady Margrave and her two young sons. Lady Margrave had been a dear friend of Gabriel, and had offered their home as shelter to House Yolanda's young during the killing season. Drusilla nodded slowly, and Queen Gabriel continued. "This year, at the height of the killing season, a lone rider rode to our bastion, seeking an audience with your father. When I saw that he bore the sigil of Arden's ministerial tributary, I offered him hospitality, which he accepted. Your father was, of course, off at campaign. When I informed the ministry's servant that it was unlikely he would have the opportunity for a meeting with your father, he entrusted me with 2 letters, one sealed by Lady Margrave's family in Arden, Regis Celari, as well as one marked by the Lord Sovereign Inquisitor. Needless to say, what was contained within them shocked I and your father when word reached him. Regis Celari asserted that their kin had been murdered, and had requested for the ability to investigate for signs to substantiate their assertion, but had been denied by the Lord Grand Marshal Margrave's representative, Ambrose Morale. They then requested that I, or your father, give consent to the Avenger of Blood to investigate. It was here that we first learned what had happened to you. They assumed that the Margraves had declined their request due to Arden's inability to protect you. I immediately sent for word from Drusilla, and when she corroborated their story, I did not know what to think." Gabrielle continued in her even tone, her eyes never wavering from her daughter. "I, of course, gave leave to the emissary with the promise that he share his findings with us. Not a week ago, the Avenger of Blood returned to issue his report. Through inquiries from among the servants and those left to keep the garrison while Lord Grand Marshal Margrave lent his aid, a man, or perhaps a boy, if your description is accurate, had been jailed in the castle dungeon for robbing from the Margrave's herd of cattle. He was to be tried the next morning, but That coincided with the morning the Margraves were discovered dead in their beds. According to the Margraves' records and the testimony of the servants and the guards, the man was never tried. He was never seen again. The Avenger speculates that the pale youth waited till night and slipped from his cell before suffocating the family in their sleep. Drusilla, Queen Gabre said in a grave tone, "It is very likely that you were nearly killed. If there is anything you can remember, I beg you tell me." Drusilla was deathly pale. From her dry throat she muttered, "Mother, I swear, he was just a child. If I had have known, I would have told you immediately. I just did not wish to trouble Father. There is so much already." Drusilla's eyes began to water, and her breathing grew shallow. Queen Gabre rose and walked around the table before sitting beside her daughter and embracing Drusilla, running her hands through the girl's long red hair. Quietly she soothed her daughter, but whispered, "You are a sweet child and a brave one, but you must not keep things from your father and I. I know it was not your intention, but you played a dangerous game. If not for the vigilance of your host, the assassin might have returned and dispatched you before any was the wiser. As it stands now, it would seem the Avenger spoke true." Drusilla dried her eyes on her mother's shoulder, managed to stifle her sniffling, and asked, "Where's Father gone? Is he so displeased with me that he could not bear to stay?" Gabre's eyes fell, and replied somberly, "I am afraid the reason for your father's sudden departure is nothing so trifling." Queen Gabre paused before continuing resolutely. "Greater misfortune still has befallen the house. Lord Grand Marshal Margrave and his eldest son were slain on the field this very year. Rulership of the house has fallen to Ambrose, and in one fell swoop we have lost one of our most stalwart allies. There is much to be done this coming winter. Plans must be laid, and you as well as your siblings must be ready." "I am ready, Mother," Drusilla retorted hastily. "Whatever must be done, I will see it through." Releasing her daughter from her embrace, Gabre held Drusilla's shoulders, looking gravely into her eyes. "We all have our part to play. Your father will ride to the far reaches of the kingdom and renew the oaths of the 12 Lord Grand Marshals. Keaton will fortify our borders. Even Elena and Faulkner will travel the length and breadth of Yolanda to restore the hearts of our people. But, Drusilla, I must ask something greater from you." Queen Gabre's hands gripped the princess firmly, waiting for Drusilla to acknowledge her statement. After a firm nod from her daughter, Her Majesty continued, "Your father has determined that it is time for you to be wed. I know this is sudden, but I promise you will be happy with our eventual choice." Drusilla remained totally still, stunned by the news, but not shocked. In light of the Margrave situation, it made sense, but still, it was so sudden. She found she had no voice, and her mother sought to fill the void. The details are not entirely settled, but it's only a matter of time before you find a suitable groom. House Mercia has offered much for your hand, as has House Durand, should we choose to wed you to their eldest. They say he has quite an enterprising mind, and a knack for coming out the better in bargains when he is not campaigning with his father. Though, if your father had his way, he would see you wed Giannis Sumter, but do not fear, that shall not happen." Drusilla nodded solemnly, uncertain how to react. She knew that her time spent in Arden was coming to an end, and she was not altogether unhappy about finding a more permanent living arrangement. But she had enjoyed attending the university in Hydria, even if she lagged behind her classmates due to her time spent back in Yolanda. She would have liked to have said a proper goodbye to her friends, but perhaps she would have the opportunity to invite them to visit her now that she was to be a lady in her own right. Thinking back, neither House Durand nor House Mercia had ever been close with Yolanda. With the loss of one of her house's longest-standing allies, Drusilla reasoned it to be wise to gain the support of one of the more powerful houses. Both Durand and Mercia would fill the void left by House Margrave, and then some. As for House Sumter, it had little to offer beyond its zeal for shedding Naltonite blood. Giannis was Uther's most loyal Grand Marshal. It made sense the High King would wish to reward him, and why Gabre would see there was nothing to gain by offering Drusilla to him. Quietly she murmured, "So you have spoken. So it is done." For the first time, a fleeting smile crossed her mother's face, before quickly vanishing behind her pristine visage. "Brave girl," Queen Gabre paused. "However, your work has only just begun." Gabre rose and beckoned for Drusilla to follow. The princess looked at her mother inquisitively, but obediently trailed behind the queen, who silently strode from the dining hall through the great hall, where servants teamed and soldiers made preparations for their impromptu journey. Keaton was inspecting the provisions being carried off for Uther's troop, but he noticed his sister, and caught her attention with an inquisitive eye. Drusilla did not know what to say, as she was led by the invisible tether her mother held over her. She could only shrug as both her and her brother were left wondering. Eventually, Queen Gabre led Drusilla up the ramparts. Looking over the castle walls, Drusilla could see distant fields, once green, now tarnished by the unmistakable stain of battle. Drusilla's jaw tightened subconsciously as she surveyed the hills that she had rode across many times in her youth. So entranced by the grim spectacle, she was startled when her mother shattered the stillness of the moment. "These last few seasons have gone poorly," Gabre started, her eyes distant as she surveyed the eastern lands. "Little territory has been lost, true, but we have not seen Nalta's ground since." Her voice trailed off, but she continued softly. "For 3 killing seasons, Nalta has pressed us sorely, and soon they may push so far they cannot be driven back into their lands. The Grand Marshals no longer even consider raids, let alone campaigns into Nalta. Instead, they counsel among themselves devices and schemes to entrap that whelp who has sworn vengeance on our family." "Curse that man and his line," Queen Gabre muttered, vitriol laced in each word. "We have been blinded by our pride and pursuit of vengeance, and the houses to the south and west are all too happy for us to flail at phantoms in the fog of war, lest they be forced to venture their true count of men and coin." The queen turned to her daughter. "Our need is great, child. We require the aid of men and gods. Your father has many virtues, but piety is not among them. What use were our gods to him when he conquered and united our lands under his banner?" Gabre said, her voice quivering with desperation. "When Uther chased away the sages who had offered their services to this land in the days of my father's rule, none could gainsay his decree. Now Uther grows old and his handle on the scepter slips. Keaton is ready to rule, but the houses question his right. They despise Uther, and those that supported his ascent did not vow to patron his son. None dare say so openly so long as Uther lives, but there are grumblings of an election and the reinstatement of the office of High Prince." "These are treacherous times," Drusilla's mother murmured. "Treacherous times indeed, if the tidings from the Avenger of Blood and the Lord Sovereign Inquisitor are true. We need guidance, we need foresight, and as fate would have it, there is to be a sign in the heavens. Those cunning in such matters say it will be clearly seen not but 50 leagues from here, in the nation of Trondheim. I have no doubt that the sages, as in the days of old, will be there to glean wisdom from such a phenomena." Gabre touched her daughter's cheek, speaking just above a whisper. "Drusilla, I beg you, go to where the river Manon touches the Vale of Flora, and seek out the sages who have traveled to witness it. I have ready men who served my father in time past, and are loyal to me to journey with you. They bear gifts of my choosing. Offer these to the sages in exchange for their wisdom and foresight into our plight. On the morrow go and say nothing to anyone on this matter. Please, my child." Drusilla met her mother's eyes. She had never seen her cry, but in the early morning air a mist had begun to form under her eyes. Resolutely she replied, "Of course, mother.